Hello, welcome to Chapter 3 Podcasts, the show for readers of science fiction, fantasy, and romance. This is Season 2, Episode 7. Today we're talking about Season 2 of The Witcher show on Netflix, which should be fun. If you listened to our last episode, we did mention the possibility of discussing Bridgerton and didn't quite realize that Season 2 had been pushed back to later in the year. But don't worry, later this year, we will do a Bridgerton episode. It is coming. But today, we have a very exciting topic. Joining me and Leanna today is Elliott Brooks. Elle is a YouTuber, author, and big fan of The Witcher, so we're really happy to have her join us. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. I thought to start, introduce yourself a little bit and also talk about what is your background with The Witcher, because I think you are probably the biggest expert amongst the three of us on Witcher.
Yeah, so I, like a lot of people, was introduced to Witcher through the Wild Hunt video game, which is the third installment by CD Projekt Red. And it's kind of the one that made Witcher known worldwide. It was very successful. It's highly regarded as one of the best video games ever. And I fell in love with it and then found out it was based on some books and then read those books and happened to have read them right around when I was discovering BookTube. And those were actually basically my first reviews. And I think some of them might be privated at this point because they were such bad quality and not good at all. It was basically me being like, hey, I like this book. It was really cool. But so I'd read the books. And then obviously Witcher got the Netflix adaptation and I was excited about that. I actually in general was a little underwhelmed by season 1. I enjoyed season 2 a lot more. But if I had to rank thus far, it would still be, and maybe it's a little at this point, just it was the first thing. I still like the Wild Hunt video game the most of the Witcher content we have, and then the books, and then the show. Although I did feel like the show upped itself a little bit with season 2. So I enjoy it well enough, but it's hard to not be that person that's constantly comparing it to the books or comparing it to the game.
Yeah. And Leanna, I think I'm probably the least familiar with it, but my husband, which is, it's funny, like he doesn't read a lot, but like he's read all the Witcher books and played the video games, and then we've watched the show. So like he has some strong opinions about some of that. I've read the first short story collection, The Last Wish, and then watched the show, and I've seen him playing the game. I haven't actually tried that one, but it looks fun.
I'm assuming he's also played the Wild Hunt, or has he played the other?
I think he's played at least 2 of them. I don't know.
Okay. Well, it's funny because the Wild Hunt got its DLC, so it's extra content that come later, were so expansive. It was essentially another game. There's so much to it. So It's almost like playing 2 more installments, it felt like, because the DLCs had so much, and they're incredible also. So CD Projekt Red just did a great job with the Wild Hunt, but the other one is more having to do with the elves, and then I actually never played the very first one. The very first one is just, I think, only for PC.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah, I don't think he's done the PC one, so probably the other 2. Interesting. Okay. And Leanna, you've read the books, I think?
Yeah, I read all the books except for the newest Season of Storms. I haven't read that, but I read all the other ones. And technically, I have played Witcher because my brother is really excited to try to make me play video games. So, like, he got the PlayStation 5 and was like, I can lend you my PlayStation 4 and leave it permanently at your apartment and then download Witcher and Assassin's Creed Valhalla and just be like, let's play. So, like, one time when he was over, he was like, how about I watch you play Witcher? And I was like, okay. So for like 2 hours, I bumbled around trying to figure out how to not walk into walls as Geralt.
Geralt is very finicky. There's on the Honest trailer for the game, they very accurately pinpoint how difficult it is to basically pick up flowers, because you have to pick up to make different potions and things.
Yeah.
He's so hard to control. And it's been years at this point since it was released.
Yeah.
And in my head, it's still a newer game. And so when I go back to try to play it, I get so frustrated with him because I'm like, gosh, darn it. But yeah, Leanna, that's a great deal. I am happy.
I mean,
I mean, I can confirm he was more difficult because my brother also then made me play Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and playing that character was somewhat easier.
Eivor, is that their name in Valhalla?
I don't remember.
Oh,
I don't know. My main big thing is I love the Dragon Age video games, so when they eventually release a new one day, maybe, I'll probably drop stuff to play that.
Speaking of, I just mentioned Honest Trailers a second ago. I think they released a Dragon Age Honest Trailer today.
Did they?
I think so. I like Honest Trailers.
That's fun. I'll have to go check that out. Yeah, those are really fun. I love the storytelling.
There's an Honest Trailer for a movie that I want to see, I'm always so frustrated that I can't watch it yet because it'll have spoilers, and I'm like, oh dang it, I can't immediately click on that Honest Trailer. So when my brother and I saw Matrix and Spider-Man over the weekend, the first thing we did when we got back to my apartment was find the Honest Trailers.
I love them. They're great.
That's fun. Yeah, I'll have to check that out. Okay, so I guess thoughts on the show. So I obviously, I have less familiarity with the other pieces of it. I enjoyed season 1 and I liked season 2 even better. So I don't know what that says exactly, but it's really interesting. And I know from talking to my husband some of the differences between the books and the games and the show, because he was like, wait, what? They're telling us this in the show now? So that was interesting.
Are we talking spoilers at all or no spoilers?
Good question. Maybe we'll do a spoiler-free segment and then we'll get into spoilers.
I was about to reference what I'm assuming your husband
yes
about. Wait, that's a big
we'll get there. We'll do a spoiler section. Yeah,
I can speak somewhat to some changes from the books, but it's also my understanding that things that are in it that are different from the books are not necessarily invented for the show but are pulled from the games.
Depends. It's hard to get into these things without spoilers. So
yeah,
some of it I think they did a combination of sort of making up their own thing but sort of saying true to the books. And Leanna, you can tell me if you feel this way too. Andrzej Sapkowski will just randomly put you in the middle of a meeting between all of these noble people or sorceresses or whatever. And then you see them all plotting and scheming. And at least when I'm reading, I keep thinking, who are these people? And you just see them talking and you don't really know what they're talking about. And then whatever they're discussing will affect the characters, your main characters, way later. And then you're like, oh, is that who that was? Is that what's going on here? And I think the show, at least in season 2, is trying to flesh those scenes out and show them a lot more and make you care about them more, which I actually really appreciated. But I have seen some people that say the show is unrecognizable from the books. And I'm like, I don't think it's unrecognizable. Some of it's straight from the books. It's just not the stuff I feel like a lot of us remember. Of course, they also added the main antagonist of this season is not really in the books. So that was an interesting decision and not one I actually was fond of. But I did like the fleshing out of this extra.
I feel like if there's anything about it that's quote unquote unrecognizable, because as you said, there's parts of it that are immediately you're I know exactly what this scene is in the book. But I feel like the tone and the vibe of the books is kind of almost entirely different from the show. Just the kind of humor there is and the kind of
it's different.
I just feel and then the costuming isn't exactly not that it's bad and it's quite fantasy and who's to say it's not a real place. You'd be well, that's not actually culturally correct for this made up place.
Right.
But I don't know. I just feel the way that things are described, the type of humor that's present, the kind of conversations people have, just the tone of it is different in the books than it is in the show.
I think Henry Cavill's, from everything I've seen, is very familiar with both the game and the books. But I don't know if it's his take or the way they want him to portray Geralt. But Geralt is, I think, much more charismatic and clever in the books, though it's kind of
he talks a lot more in the books.
Yes, he does. It's less. I think season 1 was just it was a grunt fest, but season 2 he did a little more talking, but it's still, he's not exactly charming in the show. And I would say in the books, while he doesn't talk a lot, when he does start talking, he gets into word battles with these people that look down at him a lot of times because he's a Witcher. And then when he gets talking, they realize, oh, actually, he's just as smart as I am. And then it's almost like their pride forces them to try to make him look dumb at that point. And he doesn't care.
Well, I feel like then that too, like
That's
I feel like
interesting.
if you like utterly boil down what his and Dandelion's or Jaskier's relationship is like, in its like essentials, it's the same in terms of like he's a gruff warrior and the other one's like a foppish musician. But like their dynamic, other than like that being true, is totally different from how they are in the books.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, Henry Cavill like is much more serious and kind of, I don't know, quiet. It's aloof, yes. But I don't know that I've ever seen him play a character that was really warm.
I'm counting on Christo and he's 16 years old.
Well, okay.
I mean, he's obviously we've seen him in Superman, and he was in is it The Man from U.N.C.L.E. or something like that? That one's a little bit more humorous, but then he was in Tristan and Isolde of all things. But he's kind of a minor part in that. So I don't think I've seen him play a character like how Geralt is in the books.
Right.
But again, I think the game still has Geralt being a little bit more clever. I think game Geralt is more like the books than Netflix Geralt is. But I think Netflix Geralt is more like game Geralt than he is like books Geralt.
It's like on a scale, like of like
of like Netflix to books with the game in the middle.
The Venn diagram.
Yeah.
If we had the video game Geralt is in the middle, and then over here is the book Geralt, and then over here, and they overlap a little in the middle.
I will say one thing about season 2, and this is something that irked me in season 1. I just felt like Geralt and Yennefer had zero chemistry, and I felt like it was so much better in season 2.
Even though they're barely together and they're
but when they are, I would believe they like each other.
But honestly, like the show and the books, I feel like Geralt and Yennefer are a lot less like I care about their relationship a lot more when they're not together. Every time they're together, I'm just like, okay.
Because you care so much about most romances, Leon.
I don't hate Yennefer like a lot of people do.
I like her, but
there's like when they're apart and they think about each other is more interesting to me than when they're together and just like moaning on about how they can't be together forever while they're having sex for the 50th time, and I'm just like,
I think I definitely like Yennefer from the books and the game a little more than Yennefer in the show. I think she's more in your face in the show.
They definitely changed a lot more about Yennefer's plotline than almost anybody else.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And I think the show, and I'm with you, Bethany, the first season to me did not portray their relationship, in my opinion, as deeply as it actually is, because they are together for a very long time. And then, so I don't want to, I'll avoid spoilers, but some of their wants for their lives individually and also just as a couple, what they want, they can't have. And that puts a lot of pressure on their relationship. And then that sort of creates this divide between them and they sort of go their separate ways, but then they're constantly finding themselves coming back to each other. And season 1 of the show, I think, made it seem as if they had this one great first meeting and then they've never stopped thinking about, like, they had like a one night stand. They're like, that was the best one night stand of my life. And then now they run into each other and they're just, it's as if it was the greatest moment of their lives. And I think all that history is not really shown. Season 2 had a moment where Yennefer has a dream sequence, and that to me better illustrated sort of their relationship. Obviously that was a over the top version because she's dreaming, but I don't think that the first season really illustrated it well.
Yeah, well, and I also just felt like from the perspective of the actors, whenever they were on screen together, I was like, I don't believe that you're actually into each other in this moment. Like, she had so much more chemistry with the guy who played her, like, earlier lover.
I was saying, like, then again, I feel bad for her because, like, she's acting, like, next to, like, a very attractive mannequin. Like, he's just literally just standing there. And, like, what do you do with that?
I don't know. This is what I'm saying, though, is I think season 2 is a lot better. Like, he shows a lot more emotion in season 2, and I think they connect better.
So Istrid is his name, I believe, that you're referring to, the other person.
Yes.
So there's a whole short story, I think, in Sword of Destiny. So the next collection of short stories. Correct me if I'm wrong, Leanna. I think a shard of ice is in Sword of Destiny. And that one shows their, I guess you could say, love triangle a little bit. How Yennefer kind of sees herself within the world and the way she doesn't want to be held down, if you will. She doesn't want to belong to anyone.
Fair.
And I was wondering, because in season 2, you get a moment where those two meet each other, and it's a lot nicer than when they meet each other in the books. Because that short story, they do the kind of classic, like, no, Yennefer's my lady. They were a little bit more, they were like, oh, you're also one of her friends, kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
But so one of my favorite parts of the books, which I was very concerned after the first season, was that we wouldn't ever have any of that. And we kind of did get it, not as much as I want, is little Ciri with Geralt. And so we never quite got little Ciri because she's not little, but we did get some of that vibe of like her being a precocious princess and like annoying and arguing with him and him kind of being at his wit's end and all the Witchers kind of like not knowing what to do with this like girl that's now in Kaer Morhen, and they're like, sure, we'll raise a princess.
Yeah, we do see some of that a little bit.
I really enjoyed what we get with Ciri and Geralt and the other Witchers. I just thought in season 2 that was really interesting, and I liked how, okay, and maybe this is going to get a little into spoiler territory, but so we'll say we can do some, we've been talking a while, we could do spoilers, but I think it's really interesting because you're seeing this almost like father-daughter dynamic with the two of them, and I saw somebody post something saying that the two of them is like a Gen Xer raising a Gen Z kid. I saw this somewhere and I was like, yeah, that is pretty on point in terms of the relationship they have, which I just think is hilarious. But with the ending of the show, which is interesting, and we can talk a little bit about how maybe this is different from reveals later on, it seems to really be setting us up for a season 3 arc that is about father-daughter relationships and having to make choices about those, which is pretty interesting.
So we're officially talking spoilers?
We're talking spoilers.
I like the reveal happening when it does. One, video game players already know this information, and in the books you get this reveal way later, but I didn't like how they went about the reveal. I didn't like that Amir kind of says all this in front of so many people, because in the books, he bizarrely also, you know how they keep talking about all these nobles, oh, if Ciri's actually alive, they're going to want to marry her, so they have claim to Sintra. He does the same thing. And so when
that's
you're like,
what my husband was telling me.
Yes.
I was like,
yeah, you're like, but wait, isn't that her dad? Well, in the books, it's the opposite reaction. You go, wait a sec. If it's her dad, that's gross. Like when you finally realize, you're like, what the heck? And so I don't quite know what they're setting up, because by him announcing this to this room full of people, I did like the reveal because it was sneaky as far as it was him that actually did that. And so then, you see those two get in trouble basically.
Yeah.
but him being like, we have to find my daughter. And so I was like, this is very different. Why does he want to find his daughter? It doesn't seem like they're going to go the same route.
Which is probably for the best. Well, I kind of wonder if maybe they did it that way to signal to fans that, like, hey, we're not doing this, like, creepy incest plot.
Maybe. Lana, do you have thoughts on it? You just make faces.
I was saying, I don't disagree. Like, well, that's how it is in the book. And I mean, like, it makes sense that he would do that in the book. Like, it's not... it is, I guess, an incest plotline, but it's not like he's doing it to find her. Like, it's not because he wants to like bang his daughter, but like, I'm sure people would object to that plotline. So I'm sure the showrunners are like, let's find a different way.
Yeah.
I think visually too, it's hard to pull that off if you start seeing him in her memories or her strange visions, and then you see the Emperor and it's the same person. At some point you'd be like, is that the same actor?
Yeah, I mean, in a book, when you just have like names, then you don't have any way of like knowing, as opposed to with actors, like you'd have to like never show the person's face. So to keep that information from the viewer.
That could get cheesy very quickly if he's always like sitting in a chair and you know you don't actually.
And you're just like, there's a fruit bowl.
Then you're also going to be like, oh, so this is somebody that I would recognize. Whereas again, if it's just names, you're like, well, that's that other second character, and like you're not thinking ever that like, oh, they might be the same person.
Yeah. I do think from the show perspective, it was smart to sort of have that reveal right after she'd been having those visions with her parents in them. Because otherwise, like, I wouldn't have remembered that that's who her father was from season 1. So I'm like, oh, okay.
Was he the same actor from the first season? Because I didn't recognize him at all.
The one in the episode with her mom and the...
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know either.
I mean, it was definitely the mom was the same actress, but
I wonder
remember...
if at this point, that's one thing season 1, I feel like a little bit. So obviously, Geralt doesn't really age the same way. Yennefer doesn't really age the same way. Apparently, Jaskier's hair just grows out a little. Like, that was one thing I feel like they messed up a little bit, is he's in the show, in that scene. And he doesn't look, you know, if Ciri is, I don't know how old she's supposed to be in the show, but if she's, let's say she's 15, he doesn't look 15 years older. So that was one. But I'm wondering if they did change the actor, if they did so because he's supposed to look older now. I don't know.
Interesting. He doesn't look that old though. Like, he still looks pretty young. So I don't know if they did change it. I kind of want to look.
Speaking of Jaskier was like the only thing that I thought I liked that I liked better in season 1, the way he was.
Yeah.
Season 2 Jaskier, I was like,
hey, upped his ridiculousdon't for sure.
And the hair.
Also his hair. Like, that was like was it a wig? Probably. It was like, what?
I don't know.
Like, he was corny and cheesy and kind of annoying in season 1, but it just worked better. And now it kind of felt like when, you know, Disney's like, oh, Jack Sparrow jokes, that's what people like. So you just like really go for it. You're like, oh, too much.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think that's one of the areas where the humor is different. He is ridiculous in the books too, for sure. And to the point where you're like, oh my gosh, at him a lot. But it's like they relied on him for the humor a little bit, when I think that the other characters are humorous enough. Or the narration in Witcher is pretty funny, actually.
Well, it's also, I mean, there's more back and forth between Geralt and or Dandelion or Jaskier or whatever in the books. It's not just like Geralt standing there silently and then Jaskier like yipping away. Like, they talk to each other. There's a funny conversation with both people participating.
Right.
One of my favorite moments in the book is when Geralt gets a new jacket and he is really happy about it. And then I think his jacket gets ripped or something. And he's like, because he just got it. And I don't know why. It's just really amusing because he's not a materialistic kind of person. And he finally gets something nice.
Oh, it's so funny. Yeah, I do think season 2 builds out a lot more of stuff about the Witchers, which was interesting, like spending all the time in their place. I don't remember the names of everything, but
their place is called Kaer Morhen.
Kaer Morhen, thank you.
Jeez, Bethany.
Look, if I haven't read like all the books, it's hard to remember.
Honestly, the amount of times that while I'm reading a book, as soon as I close the book, I'm like, I don't know any of those characters' names. I don't know.
There are an exceptionally high number of strange long names in the Witcher books in general.
That's true too.
There are a lot.
It's a translated work, so some of those names you're like, I don't know what this one is. This person's name is the first letter of their name. That's how it works for me now. And some of the names I only have an idea because of the video game. Like, I wouldn't know how to say Dijkstra otherwise.
No, yeah.
So I got all my pronunciations from the audiobook, and he says some of them differently. Like, he says Dijkstra.
Yeah.
And so I was like, wait, what? Also, he switches before, like, he says Dandelion in like the first
Dandelion?
2 books, and then Dandelion in the later. I was like, who?
What?
So the word for his name in Polish is a different flower, I believe.
It means buttercup.
Yes, but they felt like that. I think, if I'm not mistaken, we view buttercup in a more silly way as English-speaking
also
people.
as a more feminine specific thing.
So
how is Dandelion not also feminine?
It was meant to be like equivalent, but not a direct translation. I just don't know why they also in the show then, because the books and the games both have Dandelion as the name and in English, and I don't know why the show, because like the first time they introduced Jaskier, I was like, oh, I thought that guy was gonna be Dandelion, but I guess not. He's some guy called Jaskier.
His name is Jaskier. They just rarely call him Jaskier. I think like hardly ever, if I'm not mistaken.
Maybe they just felt like it was too silly for the show.
And I think these are just random tidbits. These are not deep thoughts about the show. I think that roach in the actual language is referencing a fish. And in the translation, when we hear roach, we think usually, at least I think cockroach.
Like the insect, yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's actually a fish.
Interesting.
If I'm wrong.
Now that's a thing they could have changed.
They could have called him mackerel.
Is that better?
I don't know.
Salmon.
Sardine.
Start naming fish.
Yeah.
Goldfish. Geralt and goldfish.
Oh, that would be cute, actually.
If it was codfish, I would like it because it would remind me of Peter Pan.
There you go.
So Bethany, I'm curious, my husband watching the second season, he's obviously watched me play the games here and there.
Yeah.
But a lot of times he was like, do I need to read the books? Like there's so much, maybe I should have rewatched season 1. I don't know. Did you feel like there's a disconnect sometimes? Like you almost should have other information, or do you feel like the show carries it along pretty well?
No, I feel like the show carries it along pretty well. I mean, I had
seasons, because season 1 was kind of all over the place.
Okay, well, I had, you know what? I think what helped me with season 1 is I had read The Last Wish, and I actually think even if you've just read that, you get enough of a feel for like who Geralt is and like how the world functions a little bit. It's not that weird. So I don't know.
Linear timeline.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I do think that probably helped me, where I was like, oh, okay, I see like where this is drawing on. But season 2 was totally different, like nothing like that I've read at all before, and I feel like I followed it fine. Yeah, it was really interesting. I think my big question was always, I was like, who is the White Flame? And my husband's like, you're not going to find out for like 5 seasons. And he was like, oh, never mind. So
I think the reason my husband was thrown off is because of the basically Baba Yaga plot line. And he was like, what is going on? And I was like, I don't know. Because this is not a book thing. And it's like some witches in the video game. So I don't know if that's what they were trying to pull from, because there's kind of that aspect a little, but it's not done the same way. So I was like, I don't know what they're doing. And I almost wonder if you haven't read the books, but you have experience with the game, if it's even that much more confusing, because you're like, am I supposed to know who this is?
I guess to me it made sense because like I wouldn't have known that it wasn't in the books, but thinking about it from a show perspective, I think it functions really well as tying together these different characters' plots and giving you a reason to care about them.
It generates conflict for Yennefer, which doesn't exist.
I will say I hated her conflict of not having her magic. That bothered me so much, because if I'm remembering, it's been a while since I've read the books, but I believe that she technically goes blind after the battle of Sodden Hill. And it's not talked about much, and it's referenced here and there. But I think some of the sort of dialogue moments that she has in the show are similar to moments in the books, except for they're almost treating it like a blindness to magic instead of just a true blindness. If somebody has read them more recently, and I'm almost positive, because there's a moment where in the book she like looks at Ciri and she's just like, she says something, and it's actually really moving, because for a long time she couldn't even see or appreciate what was around her the same way anymore, and now she can again. And so there's this desire for her to get her sight back, but it's not the same as her trying to get her magic back. I don't know. I was frustrated because I was like, why? For the whole season. This is frustrating.
That's interesting. I wonder.
It's because they ran out of CGI budget. They're like, okay, Yennefer doesn't do magic. Great. Less CGI.
I feel like they spent all of it on the last episode. No, but one thing that is interesting, right, is if they had gone with the actual blindness, there's been, I think, more conversation lately about like trying not to use disability in that way, with like magical healing stuff. And so I kind of wonder if maybe I'm giving them too much credit, but like maybe that's
too much credit. I think they decided this would be some juicy conflict for her. and be
Maybe,
simpler
yeah.
for like.
I mean, it is interesting. It is kind of interesting. And it seems like they're trying to tie it into this idea of balance, right? That like she killed all of these people. And so like to achieve balance, she has to sacrifice herself, which...
That's another thing the show, the books, it's a very soft magic system. And I think the show is trying to make it more established and add those extra layers to it. So I think you're right that maybe that's part of it, is this, you did all this, so now this is what you lose sort of thing, especially with their whole aspect of the fire magic being the one that's really hard to control. It's interesting how some of the changes, they still sort of tied back to the book. So an example, Yennefer does, I'm just going to word this very poorly, she does totally mess up that one guy's face with, she burns him, and she is the one that goes and helps Dandelion, but I think she just uses magic, if I'm not mistaken. And so I thought it was clever the way the show had her
do the alcohol. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I liked that moment. I was like, oh, because I was sitting there like, how is she going to do this? She doesn't have her magic.
Yeah.
Like, oh, kind of sort of the same end result. I liked that.
I liked it too. I thought that was cool. Yeah. I also thought Fringilla was such an interesting character, and her, like, seeing her whole arc. And I was not expecting the moment where she goes in and freezes everybody and like kills all those guys. I was like, oh,
so that, okay. I feel that some of that was some nods. There's a few times that I think they're making nods to the video game, and I can't say that with certainty, but there's in one of the DLCs, there's a moment where the antagonist does that same thing. He freezes everyone, and then I don't even like thinking about it because it grosses me out so much, but he like takes something and then puts it in the person's eye while they're frozen, and Fringilla basically does that same thing. Yep. So I knew it was coming. I'm like, she's gonna stick something in somebody's eye. And I was all freaking out about it. I hate eye stuff. Oh my gosh. But so that was sort of a nod. It was obviously a very different moment, different character, but technically in the video game that's a made up character too for the game and not in the books. But yeah, that was disgusting. And I agree though that Fringilla's art, I almost think sometimes they are restricted by having something based off of a book series, because you have to try to obviously base it off the book series and do so in a satisfying way, but it's not the easiest thing to adapt. And so they're trying to flesh out and establish these other characters. And I feel like when they got the opportunity to do their own thing with Fringilla, it was actually pretty good. I was impressed.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, well, I'm into speaking of like, it's not being the easiest thing to adapt. I feel like, and you alluded to this earlier, just how Andrzej Sapkowski like has just does not care about telling things in a way that like makes sense, or like especially like that's why like by the end of the series I was starting to lose patience with it, because we would just off-road for history lesson for like 50 pages, and I was like, why? Like, I understand what you are telling me. I do not understand why you are telling me this right now. And so like if the show was like completely accurate to the books in that sense as well, in terms of the order in which you learn information and the order in which scenes are presented to you, I mean, I guess season 1 was trying, and that's why it was so like wildly all over the place and no one knew what was going on.
I think it is I don't think it's a show you want to have be exactly true to the books at all. I know a lot of times book fans will be frustrated, and I know I can be frustrated too, but it depends on what you're changing. And if you're changing something for the better, then I'm like, go for it. But I just thought it was interesting that they even tried to adapt the short stories with the split timeline. And a lot of people by the end actually liked it because they felt like, oh, this show actually challenged me and made me want to go back and rewatch and look for all those things. So I'm like, okay, that's good. I'm glad you liked it. But some of what they did, like I mentioned earlier, I don't need to elaborate on this. I just don't feel like they captured the depth of Geralt and Yennefer's relationship in that first season. I really don't know why they changed some aspects of Geralt and Ciri, because technically Geralt and Ciri have met before the battle. In the books, they've met before. Like there's a whole part where he meets her when she goes to that one forest that's kind of magical, and he meets her then. He like carries her on his shoulders, and he's like telling her to blow snot out of her nose like a certain way. And it's like, that's, I think, what Leanna was talking about a little bit with the relationship between him and little girl Ciri. And he's still at that point is like, I'm not gonna take her. I know I, evoked the law of surprise, but I'm not gonna do it or whatever. And so he's interacted with her and met her before. And in the show, there was just like this grand meeting moment. And I was like, I mean, why do they care so much?
Geralt is your destiny.
Yeah. At that point, she's why, like, who? I don't know who this is.
Well, because also, like, the way that Ciri was in the first season, she, like, didn't say anything all the time. She was just, like, doe-eyed and afraid and just, like, this pretty little princess. And I love how, like, rambunctious she is in the books and how much how much grief she gives Geralt all of the time and how frustrated he is with her all the time. And I just, like, when she was like that, like, completely, like, boring, wide-eyed, beautiful snow maiden, like, the whole of season 1. And then they meet and she's already, like, grown up and, like, he's been, like, stiff as a wooden board all the season. So I was like, I'm never going to get this, like, fun interaction with them. So I did like that them together in Kaer Morhen in season 2, she was kind of, like, feisty and would, like, talk back to him and he'd be like,
yeah. I liked their dynamic. I thought it was great. She was fun.
Want more of it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what they're going to do in season 3.
I think it's interesting because, right, we're coming out of her having these memories of her parents and choosing to go back to Geralt as her kind of father figure. But now, right, her actual father, or like biological father, is now alive. And so she's going to have, like, I'm guessing they're going to play that up a lot where she's going to have to, like, make difficult choices about who she's going to be with or who she's going to support and, like,
who her real family is.
Right.
Probably a sense of betrayal too. So my father's been alive this whole time. Why didn't he say or do something?
Right. Well, but I mean, Ciri doesn't know that. And in the end of season 2, the audience.
Not yet, but I feel like they're setting it up for her to learn. Like, I think they're gonna do that.
If they do it the way, the way you're describing, I think she would be like, "What the heck, Dad? You've been alive this whole time." I could see them making it a big moment for when she finds out. Yeah. And then there being this separation between her and Geralt.
I mean, they did go out of their way to have her have a line in season 2 where she's like, Geralt's the father that
I never had. Yeah.
And then they're like, yes, that line. He's here, actually.
Without that line, everyone would agree that she started to have that kind of relationship with him. But they went, like, they made it explicit that she's like, he is the father that I never said.
I can't be mad at that because I feel like the video game makes it very clear it's a father-daughter relationship. And there are still people that would be like, I wish they would hook up. And you're like, that's weird. That's gross. What do they have to do to make it clear that it's father-daughter type of vibes, not romantic? So
well, I don't mind them like being very clear about it. Yeah, that's gross.
I actually think I feel like we kind of accidentally started going into predictions, but in the books, we've seen now Geralt and Ciri in the show having their father-daughter. And we do get some Yennefer Ciri moments in the books, and I was really nervous and actually quite upset. Leanna can say, she can vouch for me here because I was like, I was really upset about episode 7 because I thought they were going to ruin that opportunity for Yennefer and Ciri to get to have their connection, and then they kind of redeemed themselves in the next episode. But I think we're going to see that because they've mentioned too, we need somebody to teach her how to use her magic. Yennefer, you're the best, so you should teach her. And I'm hoping we're going to see that.
The book kind of like montages that, but we could actually have some episodes.
We could actually see it, yeah.
And I would love to see it. I would love to see it. And I think that we would see more character growth with Yennefer as well. Because of course, they sort of added in backstory for Yennefer and elaborated on that for viewers to care more because she just kind of shows up and she's this cold, mysterious sorceress that Geralt's kind of obsessed with a little bit. And so I think they're giving her more earlier on rather than waiting a long time and then giving her backstory.
You know what? I'm just now, it's now just occurring to me with the conversation we had earlier about blindness. Like, I know they did get some backlash for how they handled her backstory in season 1 with like the disability piece of it. So I wonder if they were like, well, we're not going to do that in season 2.
Oh. I wasn't aware of that. I didn't see those conversations, but that is a thing in the books. So it's true. Right. But I don't think they changed it because they're like, well, the books are older or something. I don't know. But a lot of what is occurring with Yennefer's backstory as far as herself physically is true to the books. Yeah. But them showing her in magic school is not. That's all made up, right?
Okay.
And some of it they definitely took some liberties with. That's interesting that maybe they felt like, oh, well, she has to. But it's interesting. I wish Mara were here because I feel like Mara would probably be able to articulate what I'm trying to say better. But I think in a strange way, Sapkowski does show you that the world sees you a certain way depending on what you look like or who you are or your background or things like that, to the point where you start to, you're almost like forced out of that so that you have some semblance of power. And Yennefer's character, I think, is the kind of person that she will give the world she'll show them what they want to see, so they'll respect her to some degree, but it's all kind of a trick to get what she wants, in a sense.
Interesting.
So I think it's almost like commentary. The same way, I think the first episode of the first season, where we see that character who is mad at Stregobor, the sorcerer, and how he laid out for her how the world would see her. And so the world always saw her as this cursed person who would only bring about negative things. And then there's this, is that really who I am? Or am I different than this? I don't know. I think that Yennefer kind of thinks the only way that she can have value is to be this beautiful, powerful sorcerer. Yeah. But in a way, in their world, because their world is so brutal, it is kind of, I mean, I think you're starting to see the brutality of their world with the elves. Yeah. Because thus far, the world has been kind of brutal, but I don't know.
It's been mostly a brutal of like gross monsters, not of like human beings.
Yes. Right.
Yeah. And in the books, it's and the game, I mean, constantly you're seeing just how terrible humans are, and they really hit you over the head sometimes with the monsters. It's just, they're just acting out of instinct. Humans,
right? Humans are, yeah.
Well, that's where the books also like constantly like play around with like Geralt's morality and like when he's choosing to act and when he's not choosing to act, and it's not always when you would expect. And which is like, I just feel like, okay, like I know people like Henry Cavill, but like, and part of it is how he's written in the show, because if they didn't write lines for him, he can't say nothing. But like, there's just, I feel like Geralt is so much more complex and interesting as a character, and Henry is like, you know, a model in a white wig. And I'm just like, that's fine, he's nice to look at, but it's not Geralt.
I mean, I feel like season 2, you do get more complex. I mean, I probably not to the degree you're talking about, but I do think we get to see a little bit more of that complexity with some of his history with the other Witchers and his relationship developing with Ciri. But yeah, it's in like flashes because he's never super demonstrative about any of it.
I will be curious to see if they do have more monsters with Geralt, if there will be times when he doesn't harm them, or even the games give you an opportunity to, when there's a monster that it turns out there's just a curse that needs to be lifted or something like that. That's when you see his knowledge of what's going on, rather than just, that's a gross monster, I have to kill it, which I think they tried to show with the one Witcher in this season, where they wanted to try to find a way, but then they didn't have any other choice. But there are times when it is a lot harder, but he can technically save the monster because there's a curse or something put on a person. And so far, it's the monsters most of the time, I think, have been just creatures. Yeah. I think we see the Bruxa in that first episode, and there's a little more with her. And I hope we get more of that, because that was one of my favorite episodes.
That was really interesting, yeah.
That was also how they did the reveal in that episode is different. In the books, Ciri's not there, so you don't have that added aspect to that story. But then when you find out, he just tells them like, oh yeah, I did this to the one priestess and she cursed me and that's why I'm like this. And in the show, they made it so that like him and Geralt have this backstory a little bit and this friendship. And then you find out later, and I actually think the way they went about that was a lot harder hitting. And that to me is very, well, I think Leanna was saying that earlier too, like the complexities of Geralt having to make a decision of when he acts and when he doesn't act, and when he wants to act because he thinks something is truly evil, but also it's a human, and Witchers don't really just kill humans just because, or whatever the case may be. I think that particular episode handled what I see as Witcher very well.
Yeah. So we're at like 45 minutes. Any final thoughts on season 2, the direction it's going, predictions, anything?
I think it's better than season 1. I feel like there's still room for improvement in a lot of, Jaskier for one. But I think they like made the timeline issue a little better. And so far the changes, like when we talked about the Yennefer change. And like, I mean, ultimately, I don't see that really affecting where this goes from here. Like this was like a temporary like side quest of almost, you know, because like we're kind of back now on the path. Like things don't have to diverge more than that unless they want them to. I think they're figuring it out as they go as well and figuring out what works and what doesn't. So I feel like season 3, I would be very hopeful that it would be even better.
I agree. I think a lot of what they did in season 2 with the fleshing out of the politics is very promising. I think some of what they did with the main, I'm going to call it main quest, felt like they were setting up Witcher Blood Origin a little bit. And so I'm hoping we can we've already done all the setting up. And I think season 3, what I would like, I know a lot of people really love the Monster of the Week feel.
Mm-hmm.
I personally would actually not mind if we took some of that away and we focused a little bit more on the character relationships and added more depth to those, especially between Geralt, Ciri, and Yennefer. I want to see them seem like a happy family, and then I want to see everything go wrong, and then I will be like so upset, you know what I mean? Because I'll be like, why can't they just be a happy family? Why does everybody need claim on Ciri?
And a new wig for Jaskier.
Yes, definitely a new wig for Jaskier. His hair is not... It bugged me. Like, every time he was on screen, I was like, what is going on with his hair?
Did you like toss a coin better, or did you like...
Toss a coin.
Toss a coin.
100%. 100%, yeah.
Toss a coin is very catchy. There's one moment... What is the name of it? Is it Burn?
I don't know. He certainly says burn a lot.
Yeah, whatever. There's like one moment in that song that I was like, ooh, I liked this. I appreciated this. But otherwise, I think Toss a Coin is just much catchier.
Well, again, like that song, like I don't think they realize how Toss a Coin, how well that would go over. Like everyone, it was a catchy tune. Like so, whoever wrote it, were like, this will be catchy.
Metal covers.
But so, like, I feel like it was once again everything to do with the Jaskier was like, well, we had this like song that was a big deal in the first season. So like the way they took so much time out of the episodes to be like
to do another song, and I'm like, okay.
But it's
honestly, I like when
recognizes him.
In season 1, the other song he sings when he's in Sintra is better than the one from season 2.
Well, just eventually there'll be a soundtrack of all of the
Jaskier songs. Exactly. Awesome. So we're going to move into On My Radar, where we'll share recent or upcoming book releases in sci-fi, fantasy, and romance we're excited about. The books for today's episode will be released between January 11th and January 24th, 2022, with the exception of, well, at least the ones I'm talking about. Anybody else who brings one can do any upcoming release is totally fine. But first, if you enjoyed the podcast, we'd appreciate if you could take a moment to rate and review us so we can continue to reach more listeners. And if you're interested in getting early access to episodes and exclusive bonus content with every episode, consider supporting us on Patreon. Huge thanks to all of our supporting patrons, including our world-expanding patron, Trina. You all make what we do possible, so thank you for that. Looking at upcoming releases, we've got some good ones coming. I've got 2 on January 11th. First up is The Bone Spindle by Leslie Vedder. This is a YA fantasy novel that's pitched as Sleeping Beauty meets Indiana Jones in a queer fairy tale retelling full of adventure, romance, found family, and snark. This one sounds like a lot of fun. Then also on January 11th is Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Sue Lynn Tan. This one is a captivating debut fantasy inspired by the legend of Chang'e, the Chinese moon goddess, in which a young woman's quest to free her mother pits her against the most powerful immortal in the realm. And then I've got a couple books on January 18th to mention. First up is Servant Mage by Kate Elliott. This is a novella. I'm actually reading this right now, and it's really good so far. A lowly fire mage finds herself entangled in an empire-spanning conspiracy on her way to discovering her true power. I think Kate Elliott is really underappreciated as an author, and like the level of world building she's able to do in like very few sentences is pretty amazing. And then lastly, we've got Electric Idol by Katie Robert. This is the sequel to Neon Gods, which was like a big kind of spicy romance that did pretty well in 2021. This is book 2. This one is a modern retelling of Psyche and Eros. So those are the ones I've got on my radar coming out.
I had you stole a couple of them from me.
Sorry.
No, I'm glad. I also had Daughter of the Moon Goddess, and also that cover artist is amazing.
Beautiful.
I think they have a Twitter account also, because they did that cover and then another upcoming books cover as well, I believe.
Oh, awesome.
And yeah, they're gorgeous. So if anybody's only listening and wants to go look it up, or you're watching, I mean,
or you're watching. Yeah, look it up. It's a beautiful cover.
And what I'll add is Engines of Empire. I don't have the synopsis here, but I know it's kind of it seems like it's got a little bit of steampunk in it as well as epic fantasy, multiple point of view. And I think you follow different children of this one prominent family, but they're all going off in different places. So I've heard pretty good things thus far. I also had Servant Mage. You mentioned a lot of them that I was interested in, but I also have Ivory Key, Amber Crown. Those are a couple that I'm excited about. Ivory Key just came out today. Actually.
Oh, cool.
I went to the bookstore and they didn't have it. And I was like, dang it. So, and then I looked online to see if they had it on other bookstores and they didn't. And I was like, I don't want to have to get it from Amazon. I want to support bookstores.
Yeah. Oh man. Well, hopefully you can track it down somewhere. Yeah. So a lot of good books coming out. I feel like it's pretty dead in December, and then January they really start ramping up the publishing schedules. Thank you, everybody. This has been Chapter 3 Podcast, and Leanna and I are your hosts. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Chapter 3 Podcast, and you can also find all of us on YouTube. Our links will be in the show notes or in the video description if you're watching us on YouTube. The next episode will be available in 2 weeks. I will be back with Leanna to talk about the first book in our first Law read-along, which will be fun. We're talking about The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie, so it'll be fun. My first time rereading it.
my fifth time reading it.
Only.
Gosh. I got the other day, Alan, people thought he was reading it, and he's like, Leanna's reading it, not me.
Yeah, no, we're
anybody
we're
thinks he's reading First Law.
Maybe he'll try it sometime.
Not gonna like it.
Probably not. No, probably not. It's not really his.
He likes
his thing.
whole heroic.
But he likes like political and economical and like history inspired. Like I think he'll like that part of it.
Maybe. I feel like he really wouldn't like other things though.
And
so
I
who
made
knows?
him read Blackwing, which is very dark, and he liked it. So
we'll find out.
We will.
He'll hate it. Officially for obvious reasons, no matter what.
You
he
have
actually
to hate
thinks.
what you love.
Yeah.
Right. Of course. But we will be back in 2 weeks to talk about The Blade itself. If you're reading along with us, we'll have some spoilery discussions and probably a little bit of a non-spoiler section at the beginning. This episode's bonus content for patrons will be available in the next few days. Thanks for listening.